So welcome to this PreSeed Academy Startup Talk on the Founder's Guide to the First Sales Hire. So I'm Luis, I'm the Program Manager at PreSeed Academy, and will also be your host and facilitator for today. And today's session is actually the last in a series of sessions we've done on sales, particularly for B2B tech startups. So first, last year we actually started with, from the beginning of, even getting the consents and getting compliance right as a startup to perform sales right. And then we went on in December to talk a little bit about personas, buyer personas, and a lot of tools on how to actually create your first buyer persona. Then we went on to data architecture and talk a little bit about CRM systems, how you should structure your data and what kind of systems you should aim for as a startup with limited resources. And we were talking a lot about what possibilities were out there. Then the last time we were talking a little bit about how to apply those data in sales. We were talking about demystifying, the actual approaches. So we know a lot about the data. We know that we should read a lot of data, but how do you actually apply it in real life? So that's what we were talking about last time. So the last session in this series is we are having today with Anders Kjær, investment director here at PreSeed Ventures, and also Hakon Junge from Capdesk. And also with me today, I have Camilla, who will be joining us in the chat and answer any questions you'll have about PreSeed Ventures or technical issues. Then go ahead and write to her. So just to put a little bit in perspective, for those of you who were here last time, you've seen this before, but for those of you who haven't been to the PreSeed Academy before, we're kind of trying to do this roadmap for tech startups, right? So we've covering a lot of different topics over the past 2 years. And as you see today, we are here over on the organization and people. So the sales track, we went a lot, we did a lot of startup talks over here, and now we're just joining or, finishing up with talking about how to actually hire your salesperson. So if you haven't already checked out our entire catalog, then go ahead and check it out on our website. There's a lot of great stuff already that you can study more on all these different kind of subjects. So for those of you that don't know about Academy, we're curated by PreSeed Ventures. And it really started because we have a lot of knowledge from all the startups that we invested in. And we were just in the beginning trying to, give a little bit back to the community and assemble some other founders and give you a little bit perspective, both from investor perspective, but also from other founders, and help you navigate these waters as a startup. So that's how it started. But of course, Academy is all about our speakers. And I think that's one of the things that make Academy so great, is that we have all these really cool founders that are willing to come and help us and go on stage and teach you something that you can't read in the books, or that we don't know as investors, because we are not walking that road ourselves. Even though we meet a lot of founders and have a lot of knowledge across, then it's always nice to hear somebody who's actually gone the road themselves. Yeah, so again, if you haven't checked out our website, there's a lot of resources in there that you can explore even further. And this is both for this topic, but also for a lot of different topics. So check that out if you want to explore that more. For this session, I need you to help us. To make this session the best we can do, then please ask any questions you have. If it's technical questions or questions about PreSeed Ventures, go ahead and chat with Camilla. But if you have questions to the speakers or the topic that we're talking about today, then do the questions in the Q&A tab. It's in the bottom of your screen. And then we'll pick up the questions at the end of the session during the live Q&A. And it's really important that you upvote your favorite questions, because that way I know which questions to prioritize. So that would be really great. If you, after this session, still are left with a lot of questions, or you want to talk to one of us, then we have an open door session here in the beginning of April, where our people specialist, Mads Petersen, will be attending. So if you have any more questions about your sales hire or team or culture or anything about like that, then you can apply for our open door session. and get to talk with Mads for 30 minutes, and it's also online. Yeah, and there will also be my colleague Alexander and my colleague Helle at the open door session that you can also talk about. So it doesn't need to be anything related to this topic. It can actually be anything, any issue that you want to discuss with one of us. Yes, and you can of course read more about this this on our website as well. All right, so today's agenda, well, I just did the quick welcome, but then we'll go on to Anders Kjær, who will talk a little bit about how and when to hire your first sales representative from an investor perspective. And then we'll say hi to Håkon afterwards, who will do 20 minutes about his best advice for your first hire. CapDesk is maybe a little bit more down the road these days, but I'm sure that Håkon will will try to make it relevant for you where you are today. Yes, and then we'll end up with a live Q&A, and so make sure to send those questions in so we know what we should ask our speakers. All right, so Anders.
Thanks, Louisa, and hi everyone. If somebody's in on from San Francisco, then let us know. I think there was a great shout out, Hagen, but it didn't sound like so. Copenhagen, London, maybe US. Let's go. I'll just share my screen here so you can see my slides. But just first of all, I think the opening comment here would be that it's so great to have one full session dedicated to one single person, the first sales hire. So if you're a sales hire out there, I think you should feel special, because this will not be a talk about what you shouldn't do or that you shouldn't hire first sales hires. It's only talking about that you should do it, and it's important. And Hagen will give you a lot of great also how to and best practices. So if you are that first sales hire, I think you should look forward to this session. So just a little bit before going into to my topic of why it's so important from an investor perspective. Myself, I'm a journalist of background. I've worked with a little bit sales myself, worked with advisory. Also, I've led around 25 investments myself, been involved in around 100. So I've seen a lot. I've seen those who deem it important to do the first sales. I've also seen those who are frustrated about it. And there are great learnings from both parties. And exactly seeing a lot is what we've done in PreSeed Ventures. We've been around for more than 15 years. Been engaged with both local and international investors, and maybe we only invest in Danish companies at a start, but it's for sure with a global outreach, and CapDesk is a very good example of that, based in London, right? So these logos is to represent some companies, just a fraction of those we are very proud of to be involved in, but also to show there are many learnings. And today's topic about first sales hire, there's one thing is that there's no cookie cutter to this. It's so dependent on who you are as founder team, what kind of company you are, and the business you are trying to build. So from my perspective, our perspective in PreSeed Ventures, I've tried to take a lean agenda for today, focusing on why it's so important. And between that and a lot of learnings I gathered a lot of input from my team on this. I'll also highlight two company examples, what their considerations and learnings have been from that first sales hire. Just a shout out here on the on a disclaimer. There's so often in connection, at least in some type of companies, there are this fear about, but we shouldn't hire sales before we're ready, right? Because that's what you learn. You heard this classic thing about nail it before you scale it. But actually, the first sales hire is so much more than hitting those revenue targets. It's about balancing out that commercial part with not only just a product focus. It's also to deem the importance of that, just like Eleanor Roosevelt said, that you can't live long enough to make those mistakes yourself. And that is typically an issue with an early stage startup, is that you don't have time enough. So you need those learnings, and that's what exactly a first sales hire also can give you.
Anders, could you, sorry to interrupt, could you do the presentation mode? Because then I think it's a little bit easier to read your slides.
Sure, of course, sorry. Does that work? Cool. And thank you for that note. And just if it wasn't clear, these slides will be available afterwards, right, Louise?
Yeah, they will. Actually, Anders, I don't know what's going on, but we see like your presentation mode and not the full screen.
Okay, just a second.
Again. But yes, it's right. We'll send the slides afterwards so you can study them more in detail. And I also noticed there will be a lot of links in the slides, so you'll get the slides so you can click on them afterwards also.
Just a second here.
And we'll also be recording this session so that you can watch it again later.
Does it work now?
Yes.
Cool.
Thanks, Anna.
So coming from you shouldn't confuse the first sales hire with the nail it before you scale it. Another thing is also that there's no, as I said in the beginning, clear cookie cutter for when that time is actually. So you're sitting out there, maybe you have a company ongoing right now and you're in that decision making of doing the first sales hire. You might only be considering how to put together your team. You might be different type of companies. So for some, let's say it could be day one. You just you have enough capital on the books, and you are hitting enterprise sales, which is a long sales cycles, maybe between 12 and 18 months. We have another session about that in the PreSeed Academy. But that will mean you will have to prioritize dedicating a full-time person to do that. So it might be from day one. It could also be that you are having customer segments that are maybe in the lower tiers, so small customers where the price per customer is not that high, so the average contract value is low. From there, it makes sense maybe to wait a little bit until you have those first few ones, and you can see that you actually get that price point that you want, and that you can benefit from actually, or you can count in that if you hire sales hire, you will also get a return for that. But it could also be that you actually don't have focus on enterprise today. So actually Dropbox, if you remember those days when you as a consumer, you could refer and you could get your storage increased the more friends you got on board. Well, that was a consumer approach in the beginning, right? And then at some point they flipped and had a focus on enterprise. And that's where they had to hire their first sales hire. So timing depends on who you are, where you are, and what kind of company you are. It also depends on, as mentioned, the team you are. So when we look at companies in PreSeed vintage, we see different kind of founder compositions. So it might be very product-driven and tech-driven founder teams, depending on the company you are. You might have a more diverse team and also have salespeople on board already. But it could also be that you don't have a clue yet on, or have a feel about how should you build your sales process and go to it from a strategic point of view. So this is also 3 examples of that, depending on the founder composition or the team composition you have, it might be different of when you hire and what kind of role you hire. But all again, around the first sales hire. So overall, as investor perspective, you can say there are a lot that we look at around the first sales hire, but it's also when we assess a potential investment, like CapDesk back in the days, 3 years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, maybe actually. We look at the team. You've probably heard that a lot of times before, either at these PreSeed Academy talks or if you have been out fundraising. So the commercial hire or the first sales hire is very important from a team skill set diversity. It also shows us that you prioritize and deem commercial important. So that's one, the team skill set. Then there's the classic thing about over-focusing on your product. You know, you have your head so much into building that awesome product, which you of course know what customers like, what's the value proposition. You just sit there and wait, customers. We'll make the best product for you. But actually, the point is here that you should get out and get those learnings from working with the customers. So selling, and so what a salesperson can give besides the revenue, they can also give a lot of insights, and that's what a salesperson or the first sales hire should be capable of. Actually, get and attract and abstract those learnings that you get from talking to customers and customers using your product, and deliver that back into not just the marketing department but also the product department. And then, of course, a thing when we look at companies is that we, of course, like to see plans, budgets, and more. Your ambition, because that tells a lot about your ambitions. And of course, if you want to build ambitions, but and let's say you show high revenue targets, but you don't have a hiring plan, including salespeople or commercial people at all, it just doesn't make much sense, right? So that's another point about the trustworthiness or reliability of your plans. So 3 things: team, Avoid over-focusing on your product and meeting traction. That could be some from our point as investors why I should consider or be doing the first sales hire. I have two of my portfolio companies actually, so they've just been within the, I think if you go a year or 18 months back, they've been in this process of doing the first sales hire. So I asked Malene and Christopher from Millennials. She's the CEO of a B2B software service company based in Copenhagen. And her considerations together with her co-founder when they did the first sales hire was something about, should we hire junior or more experienced? We would like someone to be self-driven because we recognize that we can't use too much time on onboarding them. We can use too much time on learning them how to do sales. But what does that mean to be self-driven? Does it mean you have many years of experience, or is it something else personality-wise? We recognize that we need to balance this issue about not only doing the product internally, but also getting out and working with the customers. So that was before the hire. After the hire, a lot of concrete learnings was ensure culture fit. So much more. So if the first three considerations was a little bit different than and open-ended questions, the learnings was so clear. It was about ensure culture fit. That's something about that. How do you assess, but also do you assess whether that person you deem is the right one also is the right one for the culture you have? So are you used to having established processes, sales processes? Can you rely on that you have a clear process between the work collaboration between a marketing department and a sales department, because those two departments goes very much hand in hand when doing sales. Maybe you have that from the company you come from as a sales hire, but maybe the company, in this case, Voba, did not have it. So you need to be transparent about that with the culture fit. It's also about the company stage. So recognize and be transparent with that sales hire that this product that you will be selling still needs a lot of more iterations before it's complete. So you can't expect that when you come on that you'll just necessarily hit sales and revenue from the get-go, because the product is still in the learning phase. And then it's also lastly was that you can't just look at the CV and results, because the product itself might be different that you're selling. So in Voba's specific case here, the mention was that we don't just sell a product itself. It comes with a little bit of explanation. So 3 learnings. ModelAI was another company I asked, and Christopher Holmgaard, the CEO there. ModelAI is also doing B2B sales, but it's more a technical sale. It's a deep tech company. For him, the team at ModelAI, the consideration were, well, should we do it ourselves as founders, or should we hire a salesperson? So that is actually, when should we actually do it? When should we stop doing it only ourselves? And in that sales hire, what's the most important thing? Because ModelAI is addressing the gaming industry. So that whole classic thing about domain industry and technical insights, is that so important, or is it just as much general sales experience, knowing the sales process so forth? So that was also 2 questions. And of course, learnings came out of that, those open-ended questions, but classic, not just classic, but very concrete learnings from Christophe and the team was, well, finding the first sales hire is so damn challenging, but it's also so giving, and I'll come to that in a minute, why he said that. He also said, well, in that order, actually focus on first sales experience, then industry network, and if you then have a technical company like ModelAI, then technical companies, sales competencies is the last one. So actually, they said, even though you could say, well, domain expertise is so important, or we have a technical product, so you can only sell our product if you have technical capabilities. Well, for them, actually, the learning was, it's the general sales experience, the process experience is so important. And then if you're out there and you have a technical product, then the learning from ModelAI is also, you can actually, for a long time, you can, even though you do the first sales hire, you can never go out of sales yourself as a co-founder, because there's so much you know. And I don't know if it makes sense. I'm just looking at the time here. I don't have the time now, I think, but I think you should go and read this. Christopher here himself wrote a great learning about what came out of this first sales hire. And in this, I'll just extract some of it. It's about, you learn so much from the process itself, doing it. There's so many good ways of how you can do it. They actually had a very competent chair of the board who they interim had to help them set up the process. And then in the last phrase down there, it says something about when we actually did the first sales hire, the first account manager, that person was so capable of hitting the ground running, because we've done a very good, work in the beginning based on all the learnings we had, right? So for us in PreSeed Ventures, at least as investors, I just want to sum it up here before time is running out, that it's very important. That's the clear message. And don't see the first sales hire as something where you need to be ready. Maybe you should actually see it as a profit center, not just a cost center, because, and I think Hagen will come into that, but if you actually don't give, let's say you can succeed in getting a sales hire based on provision itself, then you will only have an expense if you get revenue. So see the first sales hire percentage also as a revenue center rather than a cost center. And then I had two good examples of companies who did those classic considerations. And I think you will learn much from those considerations, but also bear in mind, you will also have different learnings which you might not have anticipated, but you will have great learnings to move, which you will use going forward. And all those learnings I try to put into 3 slides here. It's very dense, but again, so you have something to use and take away from afterwards. But it's actually saying much of the things both Christoph and Melanie said and their learnings, because those were very great general learnings. It's something about be agile. It's actually a statement from my colleague Mads, because you can learn so much from as founder yourself to go out and do sales also when you build your product. We also talked about it's important to understand that iterations are needed. So be transparent with those salespeople you hire, that they can expect that the product is not final, so they can't go out and expect customers to buy into the final product yet. There are differences whether you should consider hiring an experienced salesperson, where there could be some benefits from that, but it could also be that you consider hiring a more junior. And I know Hagen will come into, if you do though, depending on either one setup or the other, then how should you go about it? Now, other learnings could also be that instead of just hiring one, you could actually consider doing 2 hires as the first sales hire. Because what if you miss out with the first sales hire? What then? Do you actually know whether it was that person or the product who couldn't sell? And if you only hire one and that person doesn't succeed, you'll have to start the hiring process all over. And time is just something very often you don't have, especially if you're not profitable as a business. There's also something about what kind of title should you give that first sales hire. So go ahead and read these slides. There are many considerations here, and we can go into more details actually, not just about the higher level considerations, but also some very detailed considerations. But I'll let you read these, so we have these after the session, and you can also feel free to ask questions, of course, about these during the Q&A. And that was actually it. So I'll hand it over to Hagen, the CCO of Capdesk, one of our very likable, one of many likable portfolio companies.
You mean your favorite portfolio company? What are you talking about?
Favorite, exactly. And especially you, and the favorite portfolio, and you as the favorite person, right? That's so great to have you here, Hagen. But if I can steal just 30 seconds, Hagen, before letting you in.
Do your thing.
I just mentioned that in PreSeed Ventures, we do a lot about the team and also including sales hires and setting that diverse team skill set. It's actually one of our value add. So if you do reach out either through an open door or if you consider getting an investment from us, that's actually something we have a great and vast experience with. And exactly what I've tried to show, and I know we've tried to show previously also, is when you go into the investment process with us, not to use time on it now, just to reflect upon the first sales hire, then reckon that that's actually something you can use proactively when you approach us, specifically also if you want an investment from us. So Hagen, I'll let it over to you and let you share your slides.
Thank you. All right, guys, I need you all to sit down and buckle up because we're about to go full power, right? Let me know if you can see my screens properly. Can you see this perfectly? So this is like opening up a can of worms. Hiring a salesperson, especially your first, is a extremely daunting task. And I'm going to do my best to give you guys as much practical insight, but I'll kind of explain what I mean by that first. But let me just kind of jump in because we don't have much time and we have a lot of content to go through. So I'm not going to talk too much to this slide. This is me. If you don't know who I am, I've worked in a few interesting companies, but what I want to highlight specifically from this slide is that I was the first sort of UK sales hire for Pleo. And that's very relevant because I've never actually been a founder and I've never hired my first rep. So this is somewhat theoretical. The first section of this presentation actually is theoretical based on an ideal world. The second one, though, is very practical. So you'll see in one of the later slides, genuinely what I want you guys to get away from this is that anyone listening, please drop in as many questions as you can in the chat or in the Q&A, because we'll get to it at the end. But I want you pretty much from tomorrow to be able to start implementing these things, hopefully, if you're in a position to find that first hire and what to be doing. And I always like to just drop my home island of St. Martin in the Caribbean just to kind of make people a bit jealous. Sorry, it's just a bit of a cheeky one for me. But you'll see at the top three, Clio, Clerk, and Qt. I've really focused on Danish companies that I've worked for because I think the general audience will be mostly Danish. So I'm hoping this will be fairly relatable. First things first, honestly, if you will do anything from this presentation, please go and find this guy. Stephen Allott is a legend, in my opinion, and his advice, especially on these two articles that he's written on Medium, are so useful in terms of how do you approach hiring your first salesperson. You'll get the slides at the end, but read up on this guy. I really respect him, and a lot of my theories and a lot of the way that I now look at sales and how to build a sales team have come from him. So that's just a useful tip, and that's just a kind of a reference, but definitely check this guy out, but you'll get the slides at the end. And I think my goal today, so I'm going to give this as a framing because sales hiring for any type of company, it's broad. So my assumption is, you've built an MVP, you've validated it, you're getting some customers that are super interested in paying for it, but you as founders, you can sell, but you probably can't do it amazingly well, and it's definitely not scalable. So what's the best advice to actually go about hiring your first hire? And the goal from this is genuinely, hiring is very scary, honestly, whether you like it or not. It's just to remove as much self-doubt as possible so that you feel confident in that decision. And I think that's the goal for me from this presentation. So I want to also assume something. So this is the framework that I will assume. Let's assume you're a startup of these characteristics. Again, because this is so broad, you need to kind of focus it in or else it won't be hyper relevant. In terms of your characteristics, you're doing founder-led sales at the moment. Your team might be between 20 people. Maybe you're more product focused. You haven't even looked at hiring a salesperson because you've been purely founder-led. You probably have almost zero inbound or zero inbound. So you need to go out and find customers. I think that's really good to build from day one for outbound and doing that in a practical way. And you are pre-seed, and most importantly, you're B2B SaaS. I cannot speak to B2C, I'm sorry, but some of this will be somewhat relatable, but this is very B2B focused. And last but not least, you're not targeting enterprise. Hiring an enterprise salesperson is a very different animal. I'm going to speak much more to the SMB and SME space. So that's just a reference point. But on the left here, this is probably what I'm hoping some of your setups would be. You're maybe just 3 people, 3 co-founders, or your composition of your team somewhat falls into these realms. And my honest piece of advice, this is the ideal setup. If I were to go from scratch and build a team and build a first sales hire, this is exactly how I would do it. I would hire an interim who would actually do a lot of this process. And that mitigates so many things. It's an ideal world, and many of you won't be able to do this, but I just wanted to show it to you. And here's the advantages, right? They can hire reps for you. They know how to search for people. They know what good looks like because they've done it for years. Most importantly, they can get the basics right. How do you set up CRM correctly for collecting the right data for the future, scripts, deal stages. It sounds dumb, but getting this stuff right in the beginning, at least as a framework, is super helpful for the reps that you bring in. And they can source talent. This is the biggest question mark. I think there's a question from Vera already. How do you find these? And I'll get to that in a second. And they can accurately assess if you're performing or not. Is it sales or is it our product that's the challenge facing us? And they can calm the nerves of salespeople. I think this, from my personal experience, when you're scaling in a company, especially as the earliest hire when I was at Pleo, are we doing well or are we not doing well? You don't know. And that's really uncomfortable when you don't have a leader who's really strong at telling you, I've seen this before, this is normal. And my biggest point, if I can push anything onto founders right now, is this Achilles heel: avoiding management debt or leadership debt. This is what all startups get. And this is just as a byproduct of typically hiring juniors. And I'm not saying juniors by age, juniors just by a little bit of experience, young, hungry, great. And they might do amazingly well in the beginning, but you very quickly hit a management ceiling where if they need to build a team, if they need to hire more people, they just don't know how to do it. And they're going to make so many mistakes. And it's very painful. It's almost impossible to avoid. You have tech debt as well, but I'll get back to that in a little bit. Maybe save that one for Q&A. But if you want to read an amazing article, Sifted article at the bottom, I've linked it there. They just released 3 days ago an amazing article on this, so go check it out. But basically, my theory and my honest opinion is hire an interim that will come and offload as much of this and coach the founders how to build. And here's a cheeky slide. So this is just a fun one, right? So I mean, great, hire an interim. How on earth would you find one? Full disclosure, all these 3 people I know them, and they're not probably interims, so I'm not suggesting that they're available on the market, so to speak. But there's a pattern here, and this is how I would search for an interim. So this is where I'm kind of hopefully giving you practical advice. Ida, great friend of mine, she's an absolute beast. She's incredible at sales and building. It's track record. So look at their pedigree. Ida joined really early at Pleo, so she's been through the growth of the company from like when we were 30 people. So I would be looking at what have they done, and then how long have they been there? So almost 4 years. If you look at Morten, 5 years. If you look at Henrik, 4.6 years. That's typically the point, in my opinion, when a leader doesn't get bored, but might be more open-minded to working on some new side projects. Like, hey, I would love to work on something new. So that's a good time frame, is what I would say, to be like, if you were to hit them with a message, hey, I'm a cool company, might be looking for an interim. That's just kind of what I'm suggesting I would do. Morten, if you're in Denmark, this guy is the best sales guy I've ever met in my entire life in Denmark. This guy is a machine. But you look at his track record, he was so good at coaching the team. So I really respect this guy. Again, I'm not implying go and reach out to these people, because these companies will get angry at me for suggesting this, but I'm just saying this is the profile that I think would be great interims. And then Henrik, great for enterprise sales. So if you want to go higher and you need more processes, that kind of stuff, Henrik, I thought was pretty good. And I just put this cheeky suggestion at the bottom. This is completely wildly inaccurate, but how much does this cost, right? If you have 0 money as a pre-seed, really early round, how much would it cost? And my suggestion, if I'm being cheeky, is probably between 3.5 and maybe 4K per day, per 8 hours. That might sound expensive, but when you see what these people can probably do in that time frame for you, it's not. Trust me, and you won't regret it. But I can speak to more of that at the Q&A. And what you want to get to, and remember we're on the theory side here, is this. Like Andrew said, 2 sales hires is always safer than 1, because they can play off each other. One might not be as strong as the other. That's fine. It kind of helps balance out. But this would be a perfect setup. And then that interim salesperson can then hand off or replace themselves with the senior hire if sales is performing and if it's iterating. And that's my honest suggestion as a bulletproof method to safeguard. But there are challenges. How long does it take to find the interim? How much time can they really commit? How do you know what good looks like? Those are the big question marks. But I can speak to that at the end, but I'm just conscious of time and I want to get to the really valuable stuff. So that's the theoretical, how I would do it if I was to found a company, just to be super safe and also set yourself up really well for success. But let's go to the reality. This is a cheeky slide, I love it. We don't live in that perfect world. This is what's probably going to happen. And this is my real advice that's practical. And here's the reality, right? Embrace the truth. I think I did a LinkedIn post yesterday. The person you're going to hire probably tomorrow is not going to be the right fit for the business in a year. And I think you just really need to be open-minded to that. There's no, so PS is pre-seed, seed, and Series A. And this is kind of really rough sketch of the journey of what I think a good profile for sales should look like. You know, you as a company, you'll be founder-led, no product market fit, very little money, lots of equity. And as you go forward, not only does the company change, but your sales profile needs to change. You need really good hunters that are really passionate, that want to solve your problems, that have experience and maybe can build a bit, but you know, they can really make things happen and they don't give you excuses. That's just the blunt truth of it. As you go forward, they need to be more structured. It's so important. The lack of structure in sales kills really badly. But what to look for in a first sales hire? So this is where it gets fun. And I think there might even be some people on the call who are about to be seen on this slide. So this is hilarious. On the left are some of my best ever sales hires, actually. These are all people that I've hired, and they're examples of strong startup sales reps. And I'm positioning this in a very cheeky way. So I hired these three when they were more at the beginning, probably of their sales career, and I'm mentioning them because I think they now could be quite an interesting profile for hiring as a first rep in a new startup as the first hire, and I'll explain why on the next slide. But I think as a general category, the key three things you're always looking for, and I would say in any salesperson, is attitude, coachability, and curiosity. And coachability for me by far is the most important thing here. And that's because people that are humble, you know, no sharp elbows, but they're genuine doers. So if you give them feedback, if they're in the field, and you know, like Anders said, in the early days, it might not be perfect in sales. You're going to have to learn about product adjustments. You're going to have to absorb that feedback and give it back to the company. These kind of profiles that are super coachable will do that naturally. And I'll get to how to test it in a second, but you know, curiosity, they need to be hyper curious. Like they just need to be absolutely consumed in your space, becoming an expert in the knowledge of your space, because that's how you do things like challenge your sales, how you like challenge customers in the beginning, and also just allow people to trust you so that you can actually go deep with them. I'm going to skip through though. This is it, but here it gets really interesting. Look at these three, and I looked at a pattern here. Why are these three good hires right now if they were going to be your first sales hires? Look at this pattern. It's really interesting. Thomas, he's a recruiter. So he used to be in a recruitment. So really good place to find strong salespeople is who have a recruitment background. So that's a trigger. So I would look for this in anyone if you were looking through LinkedIn, for example, and look at the pedigree and also look at the month of transition, 7 months in that role, 6 months. You know, they're all very similar, 6 months, 5 months, 5 months. You look at Josh, look at the progression. And this is really interesting because it's very consistent, but also look at the background. JB, as we call him, James, he was a designer, nothing to do with sales, but this guy is so creative and he's really strong at sales. We even hired him at CapDesk. And then Josh is a rare breed for me. And this one's very special because he was a door-to-door sales guy before, had never done software as a service sales before. He walked into the Pleo office unannounced and he applied for the job in person. Weird. Are you going to get those? And what I'm trying to emphasize is it's random, but look at the pedigrees. Like, how do they approach you on those three characteristics? And if I were to hire a first sales rep now, I would be profiling for these kind of backgrounds because they're, you know, Josh was phenomenal, and I think he's done quite well since I left Pleo. So I think he's quite a strong profile. Same with all three, but I can talk more about them or about that kind of profile later, but I just want you to see some examples. How do you evaluate them? This is a tricky one, right? So great, found someone. How do I know if they're actually going to be good at sales for me and for my business? I'm a big believer in setting up really solid recruitment processes. We wrote about this at CapDesk. It's not as relevant for early stage, but still setting up a framework I think is critical. It takes the guesswork out of everything. You know, don't always hire by your gut. I know it can be very compelling, but honestly, you know, setting up a simple framework doesn't take long. I know that founders are busy, but if I were to say anything that's critical in this process is set up a really good sales challenge just to kind of evaluate their competencies in the role and also how flexible they are to change. Again, hitting in that coachability piece. Screening calls, you're looking for resilience and hunger. They don't need to be long. You can take a chance on people, as you saw with, you know, James having a design background and people having different backgrounds. And in the interview, you want to see that curiosity build. Do they get more excited? Do they get more into the process? And it sounds intense in terms of time commitment, but if you do a good recruitment process, and I can speak more about this later, and build a great challenge, most reps will find it quite fun. And it is supposed to be fun because it gives them a good day in the life of the role. And what I've done, I've actually linked at the bottom our own resources. So it's now public for you guys. If you want to go in, these are two of the challenges that we use at CapDesk. Yes, we're later stage, but still relevant. We've built out a cold outbound email challenge, and we've built out also a warm cold calling challenge. These are just two critical things that you need to test, I'm sorry. And all reps should be, especially for really early stage, should be kind of pumped to do something like this. But if you're starting from blank, you know, that link at the bottom, which will be shared, gives you access to ours. It's public, so there's nothing wrong with us sharing it. We share it with all candidates, but take that as inspiration, maybe whittle it into your own kind of format for your own business, but it's very custom, but it's super helpful, and also gives you a framework to go by. And I'm actually really going to be brief on this last one, so I'm almost done. Because this last one's tricky. You know, how do you help them succeed, and what happens when it doesn't work out? So I've only made one slide here, and this depends on jurisdictions, but in general, here's my 3 points that I just want to emphasize, and I can talk more about this in the Q&A. The biggest thing in startup hiring is just set expectations. People should be aware that it's going to be dangerous. You know, you might run out of money tomorrow, in a month, in 3 months. That's the reality of the situation. People who are aware of that should be, and, you know, just agree on, you know, if it's going to be a trial run. You know, a lot of people are just open-minded to it, but you just need to set that tone and not promise too much from the beginning. And then I would say, look at leading indicators. Like Anders said, you might not get sales right off the bat, but are the indicators of, you know, the right type of activity, the right type of work there? Are you learning? Are you iterating as you go? That is a profile, and those are strong hires. And that's something to keep an eye on. And respect the process. I honestly think, even though you hire your first rep, founders should be heavily still involved in sales. Like, I'm not a fan of founders punching out from sales as quickly as possible. You guys know the product and the industry better than anyone. You need to be right there with them as long as you can, but hand off to them as fast as you want. And if revenue isn't coming, you know, I really would expect the reps, if they're strong enough, to drive the process of getting the information, getting the feedback, and kind of feeding that to you as the founding team or product. I think that's super important. It shouldn't be coming from the founders to drive that process. It should be coming from the reps. And then give them your time just so that they can actually set the tone. And then the last one is, if it's not working, sometimes it doesn't work, and this one's tough, but this is just the reality in startups. There's a sort of a notice period, or you know, that what am I looking at here? So that probation period, right? As long as you're clear from the beginning on expectations, and in your one-on-ones you're kind of reviewing progress, it should never come as a surprise if at the end of a certain period of time, hey, this isn't working. That will happen. It's tough, but sometimes pulling the plug is far more efficient than trying to make someone work, because it just, sometimes you can feel it. But I can speak more about that in the Q&A. So yeah, I think that's actually it. I don't know if we're like way ahead of time, which gives us more time for Q&A, but please bring questions to Q&A. I can speak much more in depth, but I just wanted to make sure we covered as much as possible. And then my favorite slide, our thank you flag.
Thank you, Hakon. All right, so we'll just go on to the Q&A. If you're sitting with more questions now, then now is the time to hand them in the Q&A section, so we can pick them up, because usually these 15 minutes go really fast. So let's go straight to it. And the first question, I'm also a little bit curious about it, because we have a question from Rege who asks, what are your recommendations in regards to the compensation package, variable, fixed, and partnerships? And I think this is also a really interesting question about how to even finance this sales rep. So if you're sitting back with the options of either hiring somebody really experienced, or if you need to do somebody who's maybe costs less but also is more junior. So how do you actually finance a good sales rep? Hakan, would you start with this?
Oh, this is like a nightmare question. Here's the truth, right? I showed you that pre-seed, seed, and Series A diagram in terms of the profile. When you're pre-seed, you have no money. So you need to be your vision of the product will need to get the right person in. You know, you're not going to be able to pay market standard in terms of what these reps either will be worth and what they're probably on. And that's where, you know, this isn't a plug, by the way, but that's where, you know, equity is important. I think this is where it's probably a bit more of a challenge in Denmark, because I don't think everyone has the same weighting on equity here. I don't think also the taxation works here as well. But if, for example, I joined CapDesk, I took a massive salary cut, but I got equity, and I was okay with that because that's the vision that I can commit to for a certain period of time. Most of these reps will be expensive, but I think that's where when you're sourcing people, and I'm a big believer of sourcing talent, right? Finding people, like I showed you the profiling, when you reach out to them being honest about, hey, you know, that's where the interim thing can sometimes work, but also offering equity instead. Like, hey, you know, we don't have money right now, but when we raise a seed, we can kind of give you money as an example. But let's say you're a bit further along, you know, I'm not a fan of too big of a variable component, but like I think pay people as much as you can in base. I think there's this theory that if you give people a low base, high commission, that they'll perform better. I actually disagree completely. I think give people a fair base where they don't have to struggle to survive. But yes, they need to be some hunger, like they need to be out there closing deals, but especially pre-seed early, they're not going to be closing deals very well because there's very little product market fit. They have to, the value you're getting from a first sales hire is setting up correctly, but also that learning about the product. How do we tweak it? What's the feedback from customers? You know, so you might have to initially pay them, you know, the higher bases, and then you have to kind of iterate every quarter. But being honest with the rep about that, I think, is kind of important. And money hungry reps early on, not a good fit. I'm sorry. So you need to find more on the passion side. Not the best answer, but it's a very good question, and it's like a bit of a minefield.
We actually talked more about this at another startup talk where we were talking about warrants, also with CapDesk, actually with Gabriel, the founder.
CG.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're sitting out there and want to know a little bit more about how to go around equity and warrants, then go ahead and see that Startup Talk is also on our webpage. But Anders, I have a question for you, because I'm a little bit curious about the balance. How, you know, when as Hakan also was saying, that you're limited on resources, right, in the very beginning. So how should you prioritize this? Should you spend a lot of money on getting a sales hire, or how should you balance your resources in the very initial stages? What would you like to see?
I agree totally with Hagen. So it's also, as you say, there's so many parameters here. What stage are you at? Is it pre-seed where you have less cash? Are you at seed or Series A where you have cash in the luxury of actually taking these, as you call it, in the real world? You would like this to do this. That depends. So I don't have much to add, because that is actually what it is. It's about financing, and either you pay it yourself, you take a loan in your house or whatever to do the right thing, hire that best one, as Hagen says. But of course, if you don't want to take that risk, it's about conviction. It's about getting people on board that can really, as Hagen did with CapDesk, I'm so willing to go take a salary cut here because I believe so much in this company, and it's a possibility for me maybe to elevate. So that's back to the whole title thing. Maybe you can convict somebody to your vision and they can do a career progression. So if you don't have cash or you can't find that financing, then it's about conviction and getting these people in, because one way or another, people need to get a salary to have to go by on the day, right? So, on the other hand, if somebody's sitting out there, Series A, it's not a problem. They've already done this the first hire, I guess, but then then it's a luxury, right? So yeah.
Great. So there's a question from Vera who asked a little bit more about how do you actually keep them in the house then? Because how do you prevent them from move on to a competitor or found their own firm? Hakan, would you talk a little bit about this maybe?
I think it depends on timing. I love when someone leaves. So this is going to sound super contradictory, right? But you know, I think there's a quote from you know, a CFO saying, "What if you train all our people and then they leave us after investing all that money?" And then I think the other contrary quote is, "What if we don't invest in them and they stay?" Right? A good place to work, I think people elevate so well. And I'm a big fan. I think when I've hired in the past, I was like, hey, you know, I would love to get, you know, 2 to 3 years from you of you going full power. And if after that we're not longer a good fit, it's okay to leave. But the way that you learn, the way that you impact in this business should be about giving back as much as possible. And if you're not learning anymore and you're not excited, then it's okay to walk. Just don't surprise us. You know, at least tell us, like, I'm not really motivated anymore. I might be leaving soon. I think that's a fine, honest communication, which sounds completely mental, but that's trust and transparency. And I think some people, when they get there, they get there. I hit that point at Pleo. I was just not motivated anymore. The company was changing. They were becoming larger. I realized I like to specialize in companies that are between 10 and 100 people. That's my sweet spot. I don't want to go bigger anymore. I've found my niche and I protect my niche because that's where I'm really good at what I do. So to keep them, I think that's the wrong terminology, is like, how do you, it's like, if you can't compete on salary, then it's kind of initiating them into things that, you know, maybe they would not normally get other places. And if that's being very close to the founders, some people are really into that. Like, I join companies because I believe in the founders and the product. That is the major thing for me. If I don't believe in the founders and the product, there's no chance I'm joining. Salary is actually my third priority on that list.
So how do you keep an interim committed then, more than just like the consultancy?
The whole point of an interim is that it's short term, right? You don't want them to be there too long. I think, and actually, here's a good story. I joined CapDesk as an interim. I was only part-time. I only joined them for 1 or 2 days a week. And I said to them, I don't have the time for this, but it's really cool what you're doing. And then by doing that, I got involved. And then after 6 months, I was like, actually, I want to go full time because this is exciting and this is going to go. And I really can see that. So that's kind of a good way to tease out the people who are genuinely committed versus the ones who just want a salary and, you know, want a really cool job. But the ones who can kind of give the impact. So I actually did this sort of, but I wasn't the first sales hire, but that's how I came in as a trial CCO. I've never been a CCO before. I mean, I'm still on the training wheels, right? But it's going well. So see it with the interims, I would honestly not expect them to stay. Their job is to set you up correctly so that if they leave, it's fine. And then they can help you hire those first 2 reps. That might be cheaper, but I hate using that word cheap. I think people should honestly be paid what they're worth, and you need to just to find the compensation balance, which might be the equity piece versus salary loss, right? And that's where I'm a big believer in that balance for people who believe in that, who are hardcore startup people. I hope that's a good answer. Maybe it's a bit flaky, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So, you know, selling in B2B can take quite a long time, right? The sales cycle is quite long. So when you spot, or how do you spot like a bad sales hire? I mean, that will take a lot of time, right? And time is scarce in the startup. And as Anna said, we want to see traction. We want to see things move fast. So how do you spot a bad sales hire in quickly, but still giving the time for them to actually work with the conditions?
Yeah, I mean, I can use an example. So even though he's not our first sales hire, but James in our team, James B. A good example is, you know, from day one, very proactive. You know, you're getting involved, you're asking the right questions. You know, you're not just jumping into sales, you're actually looking at the company realistically and what are the knowledge gaps that I currently have? Where do I need to kind of up my game? You know, wanting to be involved in onboarding calls, you know, not just seeing it as like, my job is to sell, my job is not to interact with anyone else. I think those are clear indicators, right? I mentioned the leading indicators, you know, are they getting involved with writing their own copy, you know, writing something and proactively sharing it. Can I get some feedback on this? You know, hey, I've got a call. Does anyone want to join me? Just being proactive, I think, especially in the startup stage. And remember, this is different to a larger company, but we're talking super early. You need these things. If they're not proactive, you'll see them so quickly. Especially now in this remote world, people are a bit more alone. But we're seeing now with our recent hires at CapDesk, they are so insanely active. You know, they're on Slack, they're asking cool questions, they're not just being quiet. they're taking that initiative. And there's a mixture of people with very little experience versus the ones that have the most.
Yeah.
But I would expect the senior hire, no matter what, and these, Nikki, Jack, and Kartik, my 3 seniors in the commercial team, when they joined, all 3 of them, prior to joining, they were reaching out with a whole company to set up one-on-ones. So they were reaching out to everyone prior to joining because they understood the idea of that runway. I need to have that a head start. The sales thing, are they good at selling? You won't know until they start selling something in your company. And Anders, you made a good point. Just because they come from, okay, I'm going to use a random example, like Apple or Google or Amazon, and they were the best salesperson there, does not mean they will be the same for you. Different company, different style. They might have had an amazing support team behind them that was helping them close deals versus a first hire. You're on your own. Can you hustle? Can you close deals? Can you make your own content? Can you do all those things? That's the profile, right? But in a year's time, that's the wrong profile again, because now you need more structure. Now you need more support networks. It's really complicated.
Yeah. So Anas, if last thing here before we round up, Anas, would you like to add something about what would we like to see, or what is the red flag, as we see as investors in our startups that we would like to change something, or we go in and do something with our startups. So do you have any extra advice on if it's a bad hire, or when would we do something as investors?
Okay, so the focus is on the bad hire.
Yeah, or yeah, let's just say that.
Okay, but I think I want to add to that you can't evaluate what you don't measure. So I think it's easy to ask the question when to know when you have a bad hire and what to do, right? But I think in general, if it's the first sales hire and other hire, it's so important not just being transparent in a hiring process, but also that you set up those success criteria and actually think about how can I make that salesperson succeed. That require you to actually maybe know a little bit about what would you like out of that sales hire. And that's something you need to consider before doing the sales hire, right? When you do the job description, so forth. But if you have those success criteria, then you can measure them. And then it's classic, right? If they're not tangible, how do you then measure them? And I think there's so many things you can measure upon, not only sales, and then on revenue targets. And those revenue targets are so different, right? So as Hagen said, and a lot of questions here about the B2B enterprises, the longer sales cycles, the longer it will take. So you can't deem on hitting those revenue targets. What can you then do, right? Then it's a matter of, do you have a feeling that they set up that right sales process? And can you validate, can you second opinion that sales process that they deem right? So if you do enterprise sales, there are so many touch points with a customer. There's so many decision makers. Whereas if you do sales to SMBs, it's probably maybe just 1 or 2 decision makers. Then it's more easy. So find out those touch points, maybe instead of assessing on revenue, assessing on how do they set up the funnel and how do those leads go through that funnel. And then it's also a matter of if it's not only just doing sales, it's also setting up the strategy and the process. There's so much more than just revenue targets. Again, it's so much adding into the whole overall strategy of the company. So I think there are many ways you can assess a person. And then it's also a matter of, do you need to take a decision within the first 3 months? Because in Denmark, we have these 3 months trial period where you can lay off people in 1 month. So is that what you want to do? Or is it, how long do you want to give yourself before you take that decision, right? Because it's also unfair to that salesperson if you're not clear on what you want with that person. So, yeah.
Great. All right, well, time is up and we need to round up.
Yeah, Rika, I just saw another question. Just add me on LinkedIn. I'll answer your question.
All right, cool. Well, I was just going to say that if you still have questions there are still questions in the Q&A we haven't answered, go ahead and sign up for our open door session. You can talk with us about any issue that you have. It's 30 minutes with one of us. And also we already have the next Academy talk planned. We're going in a whole different direction this time and talk a little bit more about ESG. And we newly introduced a ESG napkin, and we're going to have a tool talk, which is a little bit different. We'll go very into detail about the napkin itself and how to work with it. And I just launched that yesterday on our website, so you can sign up for that already. So I just want to say thank you for participating today, and I hope to see you again next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
And thank you, Anas.
Bye.
Bye.